I always knew my mom had a way of making everything about herself, but I never thought she would try to take control of my wedding too. When I got engaged, I honestly believed things between us might finally improve. For a little while, it seemed like they had. She smiled when I showed her the venue, nodded approvingly at the flower arrangements, and even offered to help contact a few vendors. I thought maybe this was her way of trying to support me, but a few weeks later, strange things started happening. The florist suddenly canceled our contract without explanation. 2 days later, the caterer said they had made a scheduling mistake. Then the photographer stopped responding to my messages completely. At first, I assumed it was just bad luck. Weddings are complicated, and sometimes vendors fall through. But after the third cancellation, something didn't feel right. Every excuse sounded strangely similar, like they were repeating the same story. My stress kept building as the wedding date got closer, and months of planning started falling apart, one piece at a time. I spent hours calling vendors, trying to fix everything, until finally one of them hesitated and asked me a question that made my stomach drop. "Are you sure you didn't call us earlier?" he said carefully. Confused, I told him I hadn't called at all. That's when he explained that someone had already contacted them, someone claiming to be me, and canceled the booking. My heart started pounding as I realized someone had been impersonating me and quietly destroying my wedding plans behind my back. For a moment, I couldn't even think straight. Who would do something like that? Why would anyone want to ruin the biggest day of my life? Then the florist asked one last question that changed everything. "Is your mother involved in the planning?" The room felt suddenly quiet, because in that moment, a terrible possibility formed in my mind, and I realized I might already know exactly who had been making those calls. But I still didn't understand why she would do something like this, or how far she had already gone. I didn't confront my mom right away. At first, I needed to be absolutely sure. Accusing your own mother of sabotaging your wedding isn't something you do without proof. So instead of calling her, I started quietly contacting every vendor again. One by one, I explained that someone had been pretending to be me and canceling things without my permission. Most of them were surprised, but they were also helpful. They checked their call logs, emails, and voice messages. Slowly, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every cancellation had come from the same phone number, a number I knew by heart, my mom's. For a moment, I just stared at the screen after the photographer sent me the call record. My chest felt tight, but strangely, I wasn't crying. I wasn't even yelling. I was just calm. Maybe because a small part of me had expected something like this. My mom had always struggled whenever attention wasn't on her. When I got into college, she complained that I would forget about the family. When I moved into my own apartment, she told relatives I was abandoning her. And when I got engaged, she kept making comments about how quickly everything was happening, like she was losing control of something that belonged to her. But canceling my wedding vendors behind my back, that crossed a line I never imagined she'd cross. Still, I kept my voice steady as I continued making calls. The florist confirmed that the woman on the phone had used my full name and wedding date. The caterer said the caller claimed she was the bride and needed to cancel because the wedding was being postponed. The photographer remembered something else, too. He said the woman had complained about the venue being too small for our side of the family. The moment he said that, I almost laughed, because those were my mom's exact words the day we booked it. She'd said it right in front of everyone. That was when the last piece of doubt disappeared. Instead of confronting her immediately, I decided to fix the damage first. I asked every vendor if they would be willing to reinstate the contracts if I could prove the cancellations were fraudulent. Luckily, most of them had already suspected something strange. After a few hours of emails and phone calls, things slowly started falling back into place. The florist agreed to hold our original order. The photographer reopened our booking. Even the caterer found a way to keep the date available. But we all agreed on one important rule moving forward. No changes could be made without a password that only my fiancé and I knew. Then I made another decision. If my mom thought she could quietly sabotage my wedding and walk away without consequences, she was about to learn how wrong she was. The next morning, I called her. I kept my tone light and friendly. "Hey, Mom, I was thinking we should do a final planning walkthrough at the venue. The manager wants to go over a few details." She sounded immediately excited. Finally, she said, "I was wondering when you'd realize you needed help organizing things." I almost smiled at that. "Tomorrow afternoon," I told her. 3 o'clock. "Perfect," she replied. "I'll be there." What she didn't know was that I had spent the entire evening arranging that meeting. I called the venue manager and explained everything. I forwarded the call logs, the cancellation emails, and the vendors' statements. Instead of being angry, they were mostly shocked. Weddings bring drama sometimes, but a parent secretly canceling vendors was something they had never dealt with before. The manager offered to sit in on the meeting, along with a couple of the vendors who had spoken directly to the mystery caller. By the time everything was arranged, I felt strangely peaceful, not because I wanted to humiliate my mother, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story. The next afternoon, I arrived at the venue early. The photographer and florist were already there, sitting with the venue manager at a table in the small conference room near the lobby. I placed my phone on the table, the call records open on the screen. No one said much while we waited. At exactly 3 o'clock, the door opened. My mom walked in like she owned the place. She was smiling, carrying a notebook, already talking about fixing some of the decorations she didn't like. But the moment she noticed everyone sitting at the table, her steps slowed. Her eyes moved from the venue manager to the photographer to the florist and finally to me. The smile on her face started to fade. And in that quiet moment, I realized something. For the first time, my mom wasn't the one controlling the room. The room stayed silent for a moment that felt much longer than it really was. My mom looked around the table, clearly trying to figure out what was happening. The venue manager calmly explained why everyone was there and showed her the call records and cancellation notes. At first, she tried to brush it off, saying she was only helping and thought she was fixing mistakes I had made. But no one argued with her. They simply listened, and when she finished, I spoke quietly. I told her the vendors had already restored the contracts, and that from now on every detail of the wedding would be handled only by me and my fiancé. There would be no more changes, no more interference. She didn't yell this time. She just sat there, realizing the situation had slipped completely out of her control. A few days later she called, asking if she could still help with the planning. I answered calmly. "You're welcome to come to the wedding," I said, "but the planning is no longer your responsibility." When the call ended, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Because in the end, I didn't need revenge or drama. I just needed a boundary. Backhand index pointing, right? She didn't ruin my wedding. She just lost the power to control it.